What's up guys, here are my first impressions of the new Wilson Ultra Tour 98. The model name replaces the original Ultra Tour 97, which was the H19 Pro Stock mold, a very traditional player's control and feel racket that used to be used by Gael Monfils. Ultra Tour 98 is a new Japanese exclusive release that came out at the same time with the whole new V5 line, but it is a new custom mold specifically made for Kei Nishikori a few years ago as he tried to make a comeback from some major injuries and reinsert himself into the newer dynamics of the slower courts, heavier balls, and the need for more power and forgiveness to allow him to compete with the younger generation as he ages and tries to find his fitness and form again. For most of his career, he had been using a 95 square inch racket with an extended handle that had some resemblance to the old models like the Wilson N Tour or BLX Tour, which is similar to what Chin Wen used, at least somewhere in that ballpark. Looking at the specs of the Ultra 98, it seems mostly like a modified version of the N Tour 95, but now being 98 square inches. It has a semi-dense 18-19 string pattern that has slightly more on the open side, having 6 mains in the throat, with the last 2 mains extending out to the very edge. It maintains a similar beam width at 22mm, although it does look a bit chunkier than you would expect a 22mm beam to look like, and it has an unstrung balance of 32.5cm. It also remains slightly extended at 27.25 inches, which is a quarter inch longer than standard length rackets. The regular 98 model comes in at 308 grams unstrung, whilst there is a 98J model being the lighter one at 290 grams unstrung and a higher balance point of 33 centimeters. From what I've been told from someone who has Kei's frames is that the frame is exactly the same mold from top to bottom as Kei's, even including the handle, where you can see that it is slightly extended at the top, where you can tell it's kind of got a custom finish here. It's also filled with silicone in both chambers to the top, which is not very common at all for a retail racket. And the Ultra 98 is meant to be Kei's actual layup, labeled as CT1, and the 98J is meant to be a bit of a stiffer layup, labeled CT2. Personally, I decided to get the 98J model as the 308 gram unstrung racket could probably come all over the place in terms of spec tolerance, so I wanted room to customize as I needed. Just understand that every quarter inch a racket is extended increases the swing weight by 9 or 10 points, so the equivalent swing weight at a regular length would actually be 325 for my specs. And of course, playing with extended rackets changes the swing dynamics, the contact point, timing, and maneuverability. My personal specs was 293 grams unstrung with 32.6cm balance, a 303 swing weight unstrung, and it all added up to be 315 grams strung with an overgrip, and it came out to be 335 swing weight with the strings. To me, it's a really nice looking racket, painted all gloss, super shiny, that really pops on the court, and has the little Japanese flag in the throat for additional detail. I made 2 customizations, one with just a leather grip after the initial session in stock form to bring it up to 321 grams strung without a dampener, and I also tried adding 7 grams to the throat with the leather grip and a dampener to bring it up to the strung specs of what the Ultra Tour 98 would, to test out how that would feel. Starting off with feel and stiffness. My first string job, I forgot it was an 18-19 pattern, so I made 2 mistakes by choosing a firm poly with Tourline Otoro Tour and stringing it at 52 pounds, but I continued anyway because I was halfway through. My first impressions is that for the stiffness, it's quite a firm racket. I would personally give it an RA rating based off feel alone being around the 66 to 67 RA, and from what I understand, Kei's is supposed to be around that mark as well. It's a very crisp feeling racket and responsive, but there is no artificial response that you'll get from the Wilson 45 braid layup that has been incorporated in most of their racket lines, including the Blade V9, Pro Staff V14, and even the RF01 line. So whilst the RF01 was supposed to be providing a more raw and pure feel, that was not my experience with the RF01. I felt there was something unnatural going on there, and I personally didn't enjoy it to the fullest degree, although it's not like it was something unplayable or anything. The Ultra Tour 98 has a far more raw feel, more like a regular classic stiff layup of graphite without unnecessary additions to the composition, so this would be more akin to what a stiff classic graphite racket would feel like. If you string higher, you'll probably need a break-in period for the strings to loosen up and open up the frame. So on the second string job, I put in Solinco Mac 10 1.2mm at 46 pounds, and right off the bat it did play more comfortable, had a little bit more ball pocketing and forgiveness. It was still quite firm but much more to my liking, and after about 20 minutes of play it broke in much faster because it was at a lower tension already. I find it more comfortable than the T-Fight still, though both are stiff frames. There's a little more give in the actual frame of the 98J, but less in the strings when you make contact, whereas the T-Fight is going to feel really solid all the way through the frame, but the strings pocket harder and give you a much more plusher response off contact. For power, overall I think this frame still leans towards a more player orientated racket with a reasonable swing weight and slightly extended handle. I was expecting to generate a lot more free power from the frame, but I would have to put the blame on recently playing with a lot more powerful 98s in today's market, which I have a baseline expectation of how those play now compared to what the more traditional rackets played like. Doesn't mean the racket is low powered or anything like a traditional control frame, but it still will require very good swing mechanics and strength to be able to self-generate the power. Power-wise, it's more in line with the likes of something like the Percept 100D, the Extreme Pro and the Technifiber T-Fight 305S than it is compared to the EZO 98, Pure Drive 98 or Aero 98. On the placard that comes with the racket, Wilson rates the power at 5 out of 5, the spin at 3 out of 5, and the control at 4 out of 5. Whereas I personally feel that the power is 3 out of 5, the spin is 4 out of 5, and the control is 5 out of 5. But I think that lower tensions and a more powerful string setup would help tremendously, like how I strung it with Solinco Mach 10 in my second string job. The 98J is in much need of additional static weight in my opinion, as you would expect in more classic frames, and once you do add that extra weight it helps a ton with plow through and stability, and personally I would recommend it if you can handle it. For maneuverability, as I've been using extended rackets recently, like the EZO 98 Plus, I am not so foreign to extended length anymore, and the 98J coming in a static weight that I personally am very used to, I find it quite maneuverable and fun to play with. It has more swing versatility than the EZO 98 Plus, where you can use the Ultra in a lot more different swing paths, or even an EZO 98 Plus that I did cut down to the same length at 27.25 inches. For the regular intermediate player in the 3.5 to 4.0 range, it's not something I would generally recommend to try to switch to, especially if you never used an extended racket before, as you might feel great playing it within practice, but as soon as you move to a real match with actual pressure, you will soon find out how difficult it can be to manage. For advanced players, this shouldn't be difficult for them to manage though, and adding a leather grip provides additional static weight with a lower balance point, and it still feels plenty maneuverable even with all the additional static weight that I added. Most shots are not difficult, but the shots you will always struggle with extended rackets are usually the ones that come very low and bounce towards your feet, and being able to find those quick and snappy wristy movements. But even with the 98J or fully spec'd to the 98 Tour model, I don't find it to be actually overall that much difficult compared to the EZO 98 Plus, which seemed a lot less maneuverable in these positions. For the one-hander, I don't really have much issue with the one-hander, though at the 98 Tour spec I would need to get used to the static weight by building some strength over the course of a few sessions, but also that slightly extended handle also required me to make the contact point a little bit further out in front, which took me about a session to get used to. For control, this is where the frame really shines, as I think it's multi-dimensional. The 18-19 string pattern allows you to be precise. Whilst there is a ton of spin control and a consistent response, an extended handle with an increased swing weight is always going to give you some extra stability at the baseline and give you the ability to block and redirect faster paced balls. And if you do take big swipes, either driving the ball or ripping the spin, it all stays consistent and you can really feel like you're reining it all in, and you can really swing out without having the fear of missing. For spin, whilst Wilson rates the spin 3 out of 5 stars, personally I think the spin generation is extremely high, and directly compared to the T-Fight 305S, which I also think has high spin potential, the difference would be that the launch angle is much higher on the Ultra Tour, despite both being an 18-19 string pattern. The Ultra Tour is going to give you way more lift and high bounces off the heavy spin, but in comparison the T-Fight has a lot lower launch angle, and it has a different type of penetrating spin that will really dig into the court and change directions, but won't get the same arc and height. But for the Ultra Tour, that massive arc is also very controllable and doesn't feel like it ever overshoots, so you can just keep ripping it with confidence, and it's going to land in time and time again. For stability and forgiveness, the racket is pretty stable. Personally, stringing this at 52 pounds ended up closing off the slightly denser string pattern in terms of forgiveness, though still nothing like a 90 or a 95 square inch denser pattern. Once the strings break in and the tension drops, then you'll notice a lot more plushness and forgiveness, more power potential, and easier access to spin. Pretty much the typical solution to any frame that you have difficulties playing with. Overall, the stability is above average. If you are finding the center of the frame more often than not, you'll have no issues. Its more off-center performance will make the racket twist, and that's mainly due to the sweet spot feeling a bit more concentrated at the regular tensions, but as I say, once it opens up, it all comes to life. Adding the weight to the regular tour weighting really helps with stability and makes it much easier to swing through, making it probably like 25% less effort and making the overall racket feel a lot easier to play with. For the serve, the extended rackets always serve better, and although this is still a reasonably nice serving racket, it's not as easy to use as something like the E-Zone or the T-Fight 305S. And though my shoulder is a bit injured as of late, so here I had to hold back on the footage, but overall I think the frame is going to be a very good spot serving racket with pinpoint accuracy and precision, but power is going to be very much self-generated and technique driven. So whilst flat serves are decent but not overwhelmingly impressive for me, but what is impressive are the kick serves. Again, that the theme of the spin potential for me seems to be far more of a featuring characteristic than the power potential. For volleys, similar to the forgiveness levels, you need to be a little bit more precise in your contact with the volleys, especially when stringing at higher tensions, as the off-center hits will make the racket shake a little bit more, but all of it is mostly neutralized once you open up that string bed. Then you'll start to bring out that forgiveness and stability, and that additional weight is probably much needed to also provide additional stability as well. So who's this racket for? It's an interesting frame for sure, kind of hard to categorize it precisely because it fits into the middle somewhere. It's not quite a power racket as Wilson suggested it is, because you'll still need good to great technique to be able to unlock that power. It's not marketed as a spin racket, but in my opinion it gets very impressive spin potential. It's definitely a control racket with the 18-19 string pattern, but is not super unforgiving, having 6 mains in the throat. The best way I can describe it is that it is a true modern day player's racket, one that leans towards the more traditional enthusiast rather than the user-friendly characteristics of today's market, which I would probably classify in the range of a Percept, Extreme Pro, and Blade V9. Some people might pick up this frame and think it does nothing special, but that's what traditional rackets tend to be like, as they are always going to be more player driven. The feel is unfiltered, no gimmicks. It does require you to skillfully use the frame, but where it's modernized is that it doesn't feel like it's impossible to pick up and play either, though the regular 98 may be more on the spectrum of someone who's a bit stronger. But power and spin are more present than it would be in any 95 model, and it doesn't fall under the categories of the control frames in today's market like the TF40 Prestige Pro or the previous Ultra Pro 97, whereas this one will give you what you put in and a little extra on top of that, compared to very traditional player frames. That concludes my review. I've also finished up writing my comparison between the Era 98, Axis 98, E-Fight 305S, the V-Core 98, and the Gravity Tour, so I'll be editing that soon and hope to release that in the not too distant future. If you like the video, please subscribe. It does help me out a lot. Appreciate if you stuck to the end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Up